Hey, welcome to the vintage vibe.
What I've got here, it's one hulk of an amplifier. We are talking 65 pounds of heavy metal and a faceplate that looks like it was really chiseled out of a solid piece of aluminum. I mean, it's got to be at least, a quarter-inch thick. For me, Bryston, completely distinguishable by the two green cat eyes. They're really Canadian amplifier royalty. And that's because they've been making damn good amplifiers as far back as the 1970s. Primarily found in studios and used for professional sound reinforcement, they made a name for themselves very quickly for being dependable as the days long. They were quite neutral in their sound signature. Some would criticize maybe a little lackluster, but they didn't really add anything, which was, again, ideal in that type of application. Very quickly, they also became known, in the consumer world as a fantastic home audio amplifier. And that was, for one reason, because they offered a 25-year warranty. And they didn't care if you're the second, third, or fourth owner. You just had to have, an amplifier and a serial number. And in fact, you could give them a serial number and they can tell you the exact week the amplifier was made and exactly what was done to it. And if you had to have one of these things serviced, which was very rare, it would typically come back in better condition than you sent it, meaning they were known to do an upgrade or two and, didn't even ask for payment for it. At least that was my experience. Now, somewhere in probably the 1990s, Bryston started to kind of go after that home audio market with the introduction of the NRB. Prior, it was really just the 4B and the 4B Pro. The Pro really just being a different configuration in the back. You had options instead of using an unbalanced RCA that you could elect for a quarter-inch input. And rather than having banana speaker posts, you could have XLR, which was, again, typically preferred in the professional kind of application. And the NRB was definitely a change, a little more refined of an amplifier, and definitely got some great reviews in its time. But really is no comparison to the later ST model known as the Stewart-Taylor model, which was a redesigned amplifier, which was now starting to become world class and was being compared to products like Levinston and Krell, but at a fraction of the price. They were much more refined, and it wasn't that they were still neutral amplifiers. But they started to have a more convincing bottom end that would dig deeper and were, known to have more sparkle in the high frequency. So I guess a little bit of a character in itself. Now the SST model, which is this one here, which is known as the Super Stewart-Taylor, had a slightly upgraded power supply. Now these amplifiers were now creating way over 250 watts a channel, which was what they first came out with in the 70s. And with a new kind of rack of or row of transistors, output transistors, now even became that much more refined sounding.
And world class it is. Let's just take a peek at it and enjoy it for what it is. A work of art. In the most utilitarian fashion, that is. But basics good. I mean, this thing has some presence to it at 19 inches deep and about 17 and a quarter inch wide. It just kind of, grabs your attention and says, I'm here for business. It's beautifully crafted, and, did I mention heavy? But you kind of expect that when this thing's packed with great parts and two large throttle transformers. Now, talking about options, for a power amp, it has more than you expect. Good quality binding posts, provisions for balanced and unbalanced inputs, gain adjustments, bridging to mono, and remote function. This is, well thought out and planned. Bryston, one of the few amplifiers designed and manufactured in Canada, but known worldwide, not only for rugged reliability, but fantastic sound.
So what can you expect in terms of service or maintenance with your Bryston 4B? Service on a Bryston? Did I mention these are ridiculously reliable? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have service done. And really any qualified technician can service your 4B, but why would you? Bryston offers a complete reconditioning service where they'll not only upgrade and update your Bryston 4B for a reasonable price, but again, if you've got anywhere from SST upwards, you likely still have a warranty. In fact, this amp has warranty until the 38th week in 2025. So it'd be a good idea to send this one in before, well, the warranty expires for a check over and a little adjustment or a tweaky poo. Bryston is fantastic with their service, without a doubt. So you can be pretty darn comfortable when you're buying one of these that it's likely going to work. Now, what can you expect to pay for a Bryston 4B? Now, I find the early Brystons, the ones out of the 70s and 80s, really doesn't matter the year. The original 4Bs and 4B Pros seem to kind of hover around $700 to $800 used in Canadian dollars in 2025. The NRB will bring closer to $1,000. And the ST model in particular, now you're looking more like about $1,800 to as much as $2,000. And an SST, you're going to be north of 2,000, but probably no more than about 2,300 Canadian dollars. And that's not so bad considering a brand new one of these nowadays is going to be probably pushing like 8K. So now they are kind of priced right up there with the much more expensive amplifiers of days gone by. They're still, I think, a good buy for what you get, but no longer that audio bargain, so to say. What do we have for features with a features? You have two green lights. You have a power switch, which, interestingly enough, it says SST power, and that's actually your power switch. It's kind of a touch switch. So let's turn it off. And when you turn it back on, just a gentle kind of push, and you have to kind of get your finger in the right spot on this. Then it goes to two red lights and then green saying it's A-OK for another century. Now, this is the 17-inch non-rack mount version. I prefer the look of this one, actually, rather than having the big cumbersome rack handles. Now, on the back, and we'll give you a picture here of the back, there's a couple little features. One, we have a 12-volt trigger. So you basically run a bare wire to the terminal in the back, and you can trigger this amp to come on and off from another component, like your preamp. You also have a series of switches along the top. One of them allows you to select whether you're using the unbalanced input or the balanced input. So you've got RCA jacks as well as balanced jacks as well too on this. There's also beside it a switch for 1 volt sensitivity or 2 volt sensitivity to be able to better match it with your preamp. And that's going to help determine the gain that you've got on the volume knob of your preamp. Other than that, you've got a couple speaker jacks and a switch to be able to run this in mono if you so choose. And there is obviously a provision for picking your very own power cord and tossing away the one that comes with it, which is adequate, but just kind of like the one you'd have on your computer. Kind of like the switch.
I know I've already mentioned these are fantastically rugged built amplifiers, but it seems that the SST series, well, The construction just looks more refined and they really do look the part.
So how does it sound? Well, the older 4Bs, as I mentioned, were a little more neutral, a little more, I don't know, plain Jane sounding. Not that that was bad. They were designed kind of to, again, not add anything and were preferred in their time in studios for, the right reasons. However, I like a little bit of engagement. Whether it be that little bit of warmth from Class A or that little bit of euphonic kind of mid-range you get with tube gear. I'm not saying I want something that, changes how the music is supposed to sound, but a little character is good. I think you know what I mean. So when I went to the NRB, again, I had mentioned that I thought the amplifier or the NRB in general was a better sounding unit. Now, I've never had the ST, but I've heard the STs are a little more bright sounding than the SST. This was a real sweet spot, this version here in the design. And today, as a used piece, I think is a really good buy if you've got the budget for them. When I first connected it, I connected it to a DB Systems preamp, which can be known to be a little forward sounding. But instantly I kind of said to myself, boy, this is a good sounding power amp. All of my music sounded just more convincing. The bass was deeper with better grip. You particularly notice that. This amplifier has the ability to, the bass hits and very quickly it can stop that bass note if it needs to, controlling that woofer, preventing, that resonance of you get with an uncontrolled woofer, which can add to muddiness in the sound. It's not a muddy bass, it's a deep dynamic bass. And I think that's one of the really kind of admirable traits of this amplifier. The mid-range I found, although it's not warm per se, it is on the warmer side compared to the older Brystons. And that's particularly noticed, for example, in like the guitar or the woodwinds, stringed instruments, vocals, where that plucking of the guitar has that little bit more decay and resonance and just that kind of realism to it. Voices, you kind of close your eyes and you can picture yourself being there. This does that well. High frequency, little more extension. The high frequency, better ability to pull micro dynamics out of your digital sources, be it CDs or streaming. Now, where I really noticed a change was when I went to a Freya Plus preamp made by SH or SCHIT Audio. And when I used the Freya in the passive mode, which should be really adding nothing, to the sound signature of the amplifier, I really noticed this amplifier's ability to create depth in the music, particularly my digital sources. Everything was more layered in presentation of sound. Instruments precisely placed, forward or backwards in the soundstage, and this did a great job of recreating that, and again, even more of the micro dynamics being pulled out of digital sources, where you can really, appreciate the design of this amplifier with a good preamp. Now, talking about good preamps, when I mated this with another Canadian branded preamp called Finale Audio, made just outside Toronto, or in Toronto, I guess, Toronto proper. That amp is kind of a tube hybrid. So it's a tube amplifier, but it uses solid state in the the output just to match impedance of the amplifier, so it makes it a better match. And that preamp made me realize again how important a great preamp is to your system, because everything we just talked about was, enhanced. And that little tiny bit of warmth that preamp added, because that particular preamp doesn't have a lot of tube bloom. It's not overly euphonic or anything like that, but just added that tiny bit of warmth. And I found that preamp in particular brought a little more of that dynamic, that kind of dynamics of the music, where the textures and stuff like that, and in particular the blackness, where when you have a high signal to noise ratio and you're not picking up really noise that shouldn't be there, all your dynamics sound enhanced. And that's what I got between the two of them. So I was very impressed, so much so that I'm going to miss this power amp because it's going to its new home, getting ready to pack it. And interestingly enough, it's going back to his studio, to a gentleman who collects the SST power amps. And heck, if he collects them, does this deserve a place in your vintage audio collection? My answer would be yes. And again, we're kind of quasi-vintage because we're talking 20 years old. But this is a really, really formidable contender in around that, $2,200 range, Canadian dollars. If you're looking to build a system around it, it is rock solid, probably has a little bit of warranty left. And again, the refinement you get out of this amplifier, I think, is unparalleled for the price. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time here on The Vintage Vibe.